Shocking discovery. Cops called on woman sunbathing at her own pool. Turns out she's the FBI chief. Sarah settled into her lounge chair, the summer heat wrapping around her like an unwelcome blanket. Her mind shuffled through endless thoughts of bills, groceries, and her children's school supplies. Just moments before, she had escaped the chaos of her responsibilities, losing herself in the pages of a mystery novel. But bliss was short-lived. The oppressive sun only added to the pressure simmering just beneath her calm exterior. Outside her quiet suburban sanctuary, the world felt increasingly invasive. Mrs. Thompson stood on her porch, arms crossed, scrutiny etched across her face. Sarah could almost feel the weight of Mrs. Thompson's judgment hovering over her, as if to say, who did she think she was, relaxing like this? A sudden jolt shot through Sarah, intense and sharp. The dread wrapped around her thoughts. What if they saw someone like her, a single mother with a modest job, as simply not qualified for a moment of leisure? Before she could shake off the intrusive feelings, the sharp sound of sirens shattered the tranquility. Confusion twisted her stomach into knots, and anxiety threatened to drown her in a sea of what-ifs. 2 police officers strode onto her property, the hint of authority in their posture making her pulse quicken. Sarah's instinct kicked in. She needed to defend her choices, her space, her life. She pushed against the tension, ready to explain the innocent moment that was suddenly spiraling into chaos. But then, as the officers exchanged glances, something shifted. Recognition flashed in one of their eyes, and the air thickened with unspoken realization. Panic gripped Sarah as she faced an impossible crossroads. Could she remain the diligent librarian they saw, or would they glimpse her truth, the newly appointed chief of the FBI, concealing her multifaceted life beneath the ordinary guise of motherhood and small-town existence? Did it matter that she had dedicated her career to justice? Did they see a fierce protector, or merely a lone woman who dared to bask in her own pool? Anxiety clawed at her throat. If someone like Mrs. Thompson could summon police at the sight of her relaxing, what did that say about how her community perceived authority, especially a woman's authority? Before they interrogated her intentions, there was an urgent need to speak. She needed to assert her identity and challenge the whispering doubts gripping the neighbors. But would they listen? The pressure mounted, the weight of expectations bearing down on her shoulders. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now, let's continue. As she braced to confront the crowd gathering behind the officers, a growing restlessness surged within her. Would addressing this insanity break her family? Would exposing her career push them into a world of scrutiny they were unprepared to navigate? The stakes were high. Could she dismantle the preconceived narratives swirling dangerously close to her children? Sarah felt a rising sense of urgency. Courage in the face of adversity, her mother had said, words echoing through her memories, urging her to rise up. But did courage mean upholding her title, defending her right to unwind by her pool, or protecting her children's innocence? The murmurs of judgment blended into a chorus of doubt. As she stood tall, the neighborhood held its collective breath, clinging to their misconceptions, while she prepared for what would either be a quiet victory or a resounding defeat. Would she summon the strength to redefine the conversation, or would this moment cast a shadow over her family's future? In that charged atmosphere, tension simmered, questions swirling like storm clouds overhead, obscuring the path forward and leaving everyone, including Sarah, teetering on the brink of uncertainty. The pressure in the air thickened, and Sarah's heart raced, each beat echoing the urgency of the moment. She stood at a crossroads, her mind racing with the multitude of possibilities. Could she diffuse this situation without laying bare her dual identity? Or was this the moment it had all led up to, the moment she would finally own her truth? "Excuse me, officers," she said, her voice steady yet tinged with an undercurrent of feverish tension. They turned to her, and for a fleeting second she saw recognition transform into confusion. "I think there's been a mistake." With each word, she felt a flicker of power surge through her, urging her to take charge. The first officer, Officer Ramirez, stepped forward, his brow furrowed. "Ma'am, we received a call about suspicious behavior. We're just here to ensure everything's all right." His tone was measured, but the eyes of the neighbors bore into her with unspoken accusations, magnifying every doubt she'd ever had about her existence in this neighborhood. "I'm simply relaxing in my own backyard," she asserted, her voice gaining strength. "Is that illegal?" It occurred to her that her query was as much a challenge as a defense. She wanted not merely to repel a perceived threat, but to redefine the narrative that had emerged. In that moment, her professional persona as an FBI chief seeped through her modest demeanor. A defense mechanism more than anything, but a necessary evolution nonetheless. "Of course not," Officer Ramirez replied, glancing back at his partner. "But with the recent shifts in community dynamics—" Recent shifts. Sarah could not suppress the instinct to question, to probe for clarity. "You mean how people misconstrue a woman enjoying her own life?" The edges of her words sharpened, cutting through the polite veneer. It was a risk, yet she felt a semblance of freedom in speaking up. That's not exactly—" the officer began, but another voice interjected. "Here we go again," Mrs. Thompson muttered, the judgment laced through her tone. The murmur rippled through the crowd, each word a reminder of the thin ice she stood upon. But instead of sinking into humiliation, something stirred within Sarah, a fury against the entitlement that had driven Mrs. Thompson to invade her privacy. What if this absurd confrontation was the catalyst needed for her to confront the biases that scrutinized her every move, not just within the neighborhood, but in her professional sphere too? "Listen," Sarah said, raising her voice above the murmur. "I may not fit your image of where authority comes from, but I assure you, I have dedicated my life to serving justice. If that gives me the right to take a moment for myself, then I'll take it." The silence that followed felt deafening. For the first time, she saw the neighbors not as detractors, but as unwilling participants in a narrative they had crafted around her. The officers exchanged glances, and slowly their body language shifted from commanding to concerned, more human. "We understand, Mrs. Miller. We just need to ensure everyone feels safe," Ramirez said, his voice softening slightly. Safe. The irony caught in her throat. As she held his gaze, a fleeting realization struck her. This was less about her right to leisure and more about her right to exist unapologetically. Wasn't that what her career stood for? It was a reflection of the truths she had buried beneath everyday responsibilities. But what if the neighborhood misunderstood her strength? What if her vulnerability unleashed a barrage of ridicule? Her mind raced violently, yet in the clangor, a resolve solidified within her. "I need to redefine how they see me," she thought. "Not just the chief of the FBI, but as a woman who dared to claim space for herself amidst judgment." "That's it," she whispered to herself, an inner manifesto forming. "I need to create a narrative, my narrative." Just then she caught a glance from Mrs. Thompson, a mix of disdain and confusion. It struck her in that moment, a confrontation with her, an acknowledgement that there was space for a woman like her, bold, capable, and fully realized. Now she stood at the precipice of a profound transformation. What lay ahead was not just the reclamation of her peaceful afternoon, but the forging of a solid identity that blended her roles as mother, an FBI chief, and an individual deserving of respect. The uncertainty pounded in her chest as she faced the crowd, waiting for her next move. But even as their perceptions tangled, one question loomed large in her mind. Could she begin to harness the power of her position to dispel narrow-minded assumptions, not just for herself, but for all women who dared to live authentically? With renewed determination, Sarah began to formulate a plan. The time had come to face not only her community, but also herself. Would she summon the courage to reveal her truth, or would she retreat into the shadows of others' misconceptions? The air around Sarah crackled with tension as the murmurs from her neighbors cascaded around her, pulling her into a vortex of scrutiny. Each whisper echoed years of being judged and boxed in, not just as a woman, but as a leader. "Say something," a voice within her urged, pushing her to dispel the misconceptions that had kept her shrouded. "Are we done here?" She broke the oppressive silence, her determination fueling the words as they escaped her lips. "If you're worried about safety, I assure you, I'm the least of your concerns." There was strength in her voice now, an assertiveness she didn't know she possessed. One neighbor shifted uncomfortably, while another crossed their arms, clearly disheartened by her defiance. Their discomfort felt liberating to Sarah. It was proof that she was shaking the status quo, albeit in a small way. Doubt had always been a heavy cloak she wore, but here she began to shed it, piece by piece. Maybe it's time to take the next step, she thought, awareness blossoming regarding how leadership extended beyond the confines of her office. The idea solidified in her mind. She wouldn't just redefine how they saw her. She would redefine her purpose. With a slow inhale, she redirected her focus back to the officers. "Perhaps my presence is what this neighborhood needs right now," she continued, her tone even. "It's risky to assume a woman with authority has no right to enjoy her own space." Officer Ramirez nodded, visibly grappling with the weight of her words. "No harm intended, ma'am, but how can we help you feel safe here?" The question hung in the air, inviting Sarah further into her own revelations. She realized that her fight was no longer just defense. It was an invitation, a chance to engage her community in dialogue about identity and acceptance. "What if I held a meeting?" she mused. "What if I offered to discuss community concerns and how biases affect our interactions?" Such initiatives weren't just achievable. They melded her professional expertise with personal conviction. "Yes," she whispered to herself, the idea igniting a fire within her. This wasn't just about her image. It was about empowering others, opening up pathways for conversations otherwise left unspoken. The moment felt pivotal. In one breath, she could reclaim her narrative and shape her legacy. A deep-seated fear clawed at her. What if they rejected her proposition? But a stronger thrill surged. What if they embraced it? "Understand that I want to foster a safe environment for everyone here. Women in leadership, diversity in community, these things matter. I want to share that with you," Sarah ventured, her voice unwavering. She could feel the heartbeat of change with every word. "Let's work together to break the silence," she suggested, her eyes scanning the faces of the onlookers, some skeptical, others curious. A flash of doubt danced through her mind, a momentary flicker of hesitation. But she quashed it, lifting her chin in defiance. The murmuring grew quieter, and a visible air of uncertainty swept through the crowd around her. What she proposed was audacious, yet necessary for growth. How they reacted would determine not only her professional success, but firmly establish her personal reawakening. "What are we doing?" Sarah thought, digging deeper into her resolve. "Are we going to remain constrained by these labels? Or will we embrace a deeper understanding of ourselves and each other?" As she stood there, she felt the boundaries of fear and expectation loosening, maybe engaging with her community, confronting biases, and sharing her journey could pave the way for new conversations and perhaps even allies. Just then, she felt a tap on her shoulder. It was another neighbor, seemingly brave enough to inch closer. "Could we talk about safety concerns? I think we might find common ground," the woman said, her voice tentative yet hopeful. Encouraged, Sarah responded, "Absolutely. Let's start rewriting this narrative together." But as she prepared to delve deeper, a flicker of unease settled within her. Would the community evolve alongside her, or would her efforts be met with resistance? A sense of urgency grew as she gathered her strength. The details of her next move loomed, charged with potential and peril. For the first time in a long while, Sarah felt as if she were on the brink of something transformative, not just for herself, but for everyone around her. Yet, the question echoed ominously. Could one woman's courage truly be enough to spark a broader shift in perspective? The meeting unfolded in Sarah's mind like an intricate tapestry, each thread representing a different facet of her vision. She envisaged a circle of chairs under the shade of the oak tree in her backyard, alive with voices, opinions, maybe even disagreements. Aloud, she articulated her vision of creating a space, not merely for dialogue, but to confront the biases that had divided them for far too long. Gathering people to speak openly about their concerns could lead to a real understanding, she thought. But as enthusiasm surged, so did trepidation about logistics. Would they come? Would they listen? The uncertainty had a familiar bite to it, reminiscent of moments in her past, always hovering at the periphery whenever she sought to push her boundaries. She had spent years cultivating the image of a competent leader in her professional realm, but now those walls felt too confining. As she engaged further with the neighbor, the woman who had dared to step into her space, Sarah realized the importance of this initial encounter. They began discussing specific safety concerns, but the conversation drifted. Thoughts swirled in her head. Was she hearing just the tip of the iceberg, or uncovering deep-seated fears rooted in their own experiences? Sarah understood that real leadership meant exploring those depths, but how could she instigate that transformation? The responsibility weighed heavily upon her. "I have the tools. I have the position," she mused, balancing vulnerability and authority. "But do I have what it takes to truly lead this conversation?" A reply snapped her back into focus. "I never thought about it that way," the woman admitted. "Maybe we do need to really voice what we feel." A flicker of realization sparked within Sarah. It was this unexpected moment of connection, though small, that validated her urge to move beyond the confines of fear. If one person was willing to engage, perhaps others would be too. The scent of blooming lilacs wafted through the air, mingling with her determination. She would not fold under the weight of doubt. She would find a way to weave these narratives together like the fibers of a new fabric. Just as that thought solidified, her neighbor's expression shifted, concern flickering in her eyes. "I wonder about the others. What if they're too set in their ways? What if they don't want things to change?" "Change often brings discomfort," Sarah acknowledged, leaning in slightly, her voice a calm counterpoint to the swirling anxieties. "It's possible that those fears are what we need to discuss. Perhaps that's where we find our commonality." But then another internal conflict arose. What can I do if they resist, or worse, attack what I'm hoping to build? The echoes of skepticism from her neighbors lingered in her mind, slow to dissipate. Yet still, a stronger voice nudged her onward. Transformation is rarely easy after all. It invites discomfort, challenges, and sometimes leads to confrontation. Could this be the moment where resistance transforms into understanding? Let's have a follow-up. I'll create a flyer, share my thoughts, and see who wants to join this conversation, Sarah proposed, her own pulse quickening as she committed to the next step. As she walked away from that initial dialogue, a renewed sense of purpose enveloped her like the warm sun filtering through the leaves. This journey wasn't solely about her fielding judgment, but actively eliciting change through sharing vulnerabilities. Yet as she set her plan in motion, doubts began to resurface. What if she inadvertently opened old wounds instead of healing them? The thought clung to her, fueling flickers of uncertainty, but an unyielding part of her pushed back firmly. The harder the battle, the more triumphant the victory could be. Leaving that conversation, Sarah's heart raced with the exhilaration and fear of the unknown. Standing at the edge of her own ambitions, she prepared for the tumult of the journey ahead. Now she had set her intentions. How would they unfold? She would soon discover if her courageous push into community dynamics would trigger resistance or finally give voice to unaddressed fears that had simmered beneath the surface for far too long. A sudden tap on her phone screen pulled her attention to the buzzing notifications. A new message awaited her, an unexpected response from someone she hadn't considered reaching out to. With a mix of hope and apprehension, she glanced down. The time had come to face the truth behind their intentions. An unsettling mix of anticipation and anxiety gripped Sarah as she opened the message. It was from Caleb, a local business owner, someone known for his skepticism about community engagement. He had been vocal about his indifference to any initiative that didn't directly benefit him. But there was something different in his tone now. "We need to talk," it read simply, followed by a time and place. A small cafe downtown known for its strong coffee and even stronger opinions. Her heart raced with renewed determination. This could be an opportunity to confront the very obstacles that had kept her at bay. Caleb's engagement had potential to either solidify her plans or challenge her resolve. Arriving at the cafe, Sarah was enveloped in a cacophony of chatter and the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Scanning the room, she spotted Caleb at a corner table, his expression unreadable. She approached cautiously, her mind a whirlpool of possible scenarios, each more challenging than the last. "Thanks for meeting me," she began, sliding into the seat opposite him. "I appreciate it." Caleb nodded but didn't offer a greeting in return. Instead, he leaned forward, the flicker of concern evident in his eyes. "I've been hearing some unsettling things from neighborhood folks, Sarah. There's a lot of distrust about what you're planning. It's not just the usual skepticism. Some genuinely fear it'll stir up problems, not solve them." Her chest tightened. "I know there are fears. That's why I want to create a space for dialogue. But we have to uncover those fears to move forward." He shrugged, a dismissive gesture. "Easier said than done. People don't like exposing their vulnerabilities. Trust doesn't come easy around here. What assurance do they have that this won't blow up in everyone's faces?" The tension in Sarah escalated. She could feel her pulse drumming in her ears. "I can't guarantee that," she replied, deliberately lowering her voice to reinforce sincerity. "But I can promise a commitment to listen, to really hear what they have to say." "A promise won't stop a neighbor from feeling threatened or attacked," he countered, his steely gaze piercing through her bravado. "What's the plan if they push back?" The question hung heavy in the air, a clarion call to face what lay ahead. Sarah had counted on resistance. She had prepared for it mentally, but hearing it voiced directly forced her to confront her own anxieties. "I'll need to stand my ground, but I can't do it alone. I would welcome your voice in this, Caleb. You know the community. What would help bridge this gap?" He leaned back, crossing his arms reflexively, evaluating her request. "Why would I want to help you?" "Because," she replied, striving to project conviction, "you care about this community too. Together we might create an avenue for real dialogue instead of the whispered gossip and misunderstandings." Caleb's silence was thick with contemplation, his fingers drumming on the tabletop. People are resistant, Sarah. You might be the spark they fear. Or the light they need, she retorted, not willing to concede defeat easily. Their conversation continued, each exchange peeling back layers of fear, both in him and in her. She felt an ember of understanding ignite, a realization that her struggle was not merely with others, but with her own uncertainties about leadership and community. As they wrapped up, he finally nodded, albeit reluctantly. You'll need more than words. You'll need action, and plenty of it. Think about what you really want to achieve here and prepare for pushback. It's time to step up. Walking away from the cafe, Sarah felt the weight of his words. She carried not just the burden of her own ambitions, but the newfound complexity of fostering relationships fraught with mistrust. Returning home, she rummaged through her notes, adrenaline coursing through her veins. What if she turned this gathering into a platform not just for her vision, but also a way to address those common fears, to illustrate that vulnerability could lead to strength? Then the thought hit her like a punch to the gut. What if the very fears she aimed to confront were more deeply rooted than she realized? The path ahead twisted unpredictably, laden with potential hazards, but Sarah understood she needed to navigate it with care. As she sat at her kitchen table, readying her flyer, the gravity of her mission settled in. The message might awaken dormant fears, but she felt an undeniable urge. It was time to face the truth behind her own intentions, and to uncover the hidden depths of others before it was too late. She typed the final words, her heart racing, knowing that her next move would either foster understanding or unleash the very chaos she feared. Could she truly handle what was brewing beneath the surface? The clatter of her keyboard echoed in the stillness of her kitchen, each keystroke drumming a pulse of urgency into the atmosphere. The flyer took shape, yet doubts lingered in the margins of her mind. Could she truly transform fear into dialogue? What if the very community she sought to connect with held a historical reluctance to trust? A legacy of wounds too deep to heal through mere intention. Sarah pushed the thoughts aside, channeling her anxieties into the words forming on the screen. The meeting could not be just a gathering. It had to serve as a crucible for honesty. Each sentence felt like a thread she was weaving into a tapestry of connection, yet one heavy with the risks of exposure. As she stared at the digital document, her resolve wavered, replaced momentarily by fragmented fears of failure. What if Caleb during the meeting turned against her, or worse, she found herself overwhelmed by the pushback she'd anticipated? Deep down, she desired not just acceptance, but wary understanding. To confront her growing doubts, Sarah closed her eyes and took a deep breath. What did she genuinely want from this meeting? The question consumed her, peeling back layers she'd almost forgotten existed. It wasn't merely about her propositions. It was about the community's voices, needs, and fears. And with that clarity, she sat up straighter. It's my responsibility to pave a way for honest discussion, she whispered to herself, a mantra forming in the quiet of her kitchen. It jolted her into action, and her fingers danced over the keyboard once more. Once satisfied with the flyer, she printed several copies. As they spilled off the printer, each sheet represented a potential bridge to understanding, but Sarah couldn't shake the sensation that something crucial still eluded her grasp. Perhaps it was a willingness to put herself in the vulnerable position she'd asked of others. As the sun dipped below the horizon, she made her way outside, flyer in hand. The world around her shifted from the warm golden light of day to a softer, melancholic blue. The twilight felt fraught with potential, a reminder that darkness often cloaked the unknown. She ventured to a nearby park, where she had often seen residents gathering, a setting that felt less intimidating than a boardroom or enclosed space. Here she could expose her fears to fresh voices and share her aspirations openly. Yet, stepping into that space would mean bearing her vulnerabilities fulsomely. The park buzzed with the sound of laughter and conversation, a cacophony of voices intermingling. But as Sarah approached, apprehension tightened around her chest. What if they questioned her sincerity? Would her struggle for engagement appear naive? Compelling herself forward, she found a bench where she could observe. Sitting amid these familiar faces, she felt the sharp pangs of uncertainty. Were they ready to hear her ideas, or did they see her as the outsider she feared she had become? In that moment of reflection, she realized she had yet to confront the inner dialogue that told her she was an intruder. To forge connections, she would have to recognize her own reservations as part of the broader narrative they would share. Each interaction needed to transform her fear into curiosity about their experiences. An unexpected sense of calm washed over her as she made a decision. She would return to the cafe the next day, bringing the flyers and inviting Caleb along again. This time as a true collaborator, someone willing to co-create spaces of trust rather than merely testing the waters. But even as she laid her plans, a feeling lingered. Resolving the impending clash wouldn't merely be about facilitating conversations. It would require her to face the daunting truth. Would she risk her own vulnerabilities to promote an environment capable of fostering change? As the street lamps flickered to life, illuminating the night, Sarah felt a sense of urgency. It was imperative now to clarify her own motives and come to grips with the fears swelling within her. Would she navigate the tumultuous waters ahead? She needed to confront not only the community, but also the ghosts of her insecurities. With determination, Sarah steeled herself for what lay ahead. One undeniable truth emerged. The meeting with Caleb was not simply a step toward fostering dialogue. It was a direct challenge to unearth her own depths in the process. Could she endure the examination of her own intentions without drowning in the pressure? The resolve to find out lingered in the air. Tomorrow's meeting would bring clarity, and it was time to dive deeper. Would she emerge transformed or submerged? It was a question that loomed large, vibrating under the surface as she turned to leave, knowing the answers awaited them both. The morning sun flooded Sarah's kitchen as she prepared her coffee, its warmth contrasting sharply with the cold sweat of nerves that clung to her skin. She glanced at the clock. Time was slipping away, and a whirlwind of thoughts churned in her mind like an uncontainable storm. What was supposed to be a collaborative meeting beckoned with both promise and peril. She gripped the coffee mug, its heat anchoring her in the moment. As the liquid cascaded down her throat, Sarah reflected on the gravity of her mission. She'd crafted the flyer, agonized over every word, but now it felt more like a fragile lifeline than a tool for change. Today she wasn't just inviting voices to converse. She was risking her sanity, her pride, even her self-worth. Could she truly stand against the tides of skepticism and doubt that had shadowed her efforts? With each breath, a mantra began to form in her mind. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. She stood taller, a flicker of resolve igniting as she recalled her own journey, a path laden with uncertainty, yet punctuated with moments of profound insight. The idea of transforming fear into dialogue now felt less like an abstract concept and more like a personal calling. Gathering her flyers alongside her growing conviction, Sarah made her way to the cafe. The familiar aroma of freshly baked pastries wafted through the door as she stepped inside, punctuating the air with comfort amidst her turbulence. She spotted Caleb seated at a corner table, lost in thought. His presence was both reassuring and intimidating. He was a figure of authority, yet she sensed his own struggles beneath his composed exterior. Today, she was prepared to reclaim her narrative and assert herself. Not merely as an outsider seeking acceptance, but as a participant in this unfolding story. As she walked towards him, a cocktail of bravado and trepidation coursed through her veins. "Hi, Caleb," she greeted, forcing a smile that belied the tempest inside. "I brought the flyers." His eyes flicked up, and she noted the mingling of curiosity and cautious optimism. "I'm glad. I think this could be important." "Important? Yes, but it could also be explosive." Her voice wavered slightly as she recalled the biting criticisms she had anticipated from some community members. "I'm nervous, which is why I need you here. We can lead together." A moment of silence passed, the weight of her words hanging between them. Caleb leaned back in his chair, scrutinizing her with an intensity that felt both challenging and validating. "Together sounds good, but you need to remember, this isn't just about us. It's about connecting with people who have been let down before." His reminder struck deep, and Sarah felt the faint stirring of her insecurities. Would her genuine intentions fall on deaf ears? Would they see her as merely an outsider? The spectre of doubt lurked, and she could almost hear it whispering, "What if you fail?" Fighting against that narrative, Sarah took a decisive breath. What if, instead, she succeeded? What if this moment became a turning point, not just for the community, but for herself, an affirmation of her ability to lead authentically? "I understand that," she replied, her voice steadying. "I want to create a space where everyone feels heard. I don't expect immediate change, but I hope to begin a conversation." Each word resonated with intention, her focus sharpening on the meeting as an opportunity rather than a threat. Caleb nodded, and for the first time Sarah felt a flicker of shared enthusiasm in his gaze. They exchanged thoughts on strategies, a dynamic exchange that started igniting ideas with powerful potential. But underneath the budding collaboration, her inner dialogue continued. Was she truly ready to handle whatever backlash awaited them post-meeting? As they finalized the details, Sarah's heart raced, anticipation battling against her lingering doubts. The cafe buzzed with ambient noise, the hushed conversations behind them adding to the growing tension. As she left, she caught sight of a group of familiar faces beyond the window, residents who had once seemed distant and disconnected. Now they appeared like characters whose stories intertwined with her own unfolding narrative. "Caleb," she called, her voice a soft tremor, "what if they question our motives?" He met her gaze, a spark of understanding flickering between them. "Then we face it together." Stepping out into the brightness of the day, determination pulsed within her. Amid her uncertainties, a thread of courage interlaced with the precarious nature of her journey. The questions swelled. Would she be able to withstand scrutiny? Would this meeting be the catalyst for real dialogue, or merely another failed attempt at connection? Sarah could sense the urgency sharpening her clarity as she moved forward. Today's meeting would demand not just courage, but authenticity. The kind that comes from laying bare not just her intentions, but her own vulnerabilities. As she approached the gathering point, the meeting loomed ahead. A defining choice awaited. Would she rise to the occasion, or fall prey to her fears? All that was certain now, she was ready to confront the day and the truths it held. The pivotal moment was arriving, and with it the potential for transformation, both personal and communal. What awaited her next, she couldn't predict, but the hint of looming conflict prickled her skin. It was time to face not just the community's skepticism, but also the shadows within herself. The confrontation had just begun. As Sarah approached the gathering point, the weight of expectations pressed down on her, a tangible presence that threatened to suffocate her confidence. With each step, her mind spun a web of potential scenarios. What if her well-laid plans unraveled before her eyes? What if the very people she aimed to connect with rejected her efforts? The crowd was already forming, a mix of familiar faces and strangers, their animated discussions creating an undercurrent of tension. It was a stark contrast to the serene solitude of her morning. As she reached the edge of the group, the chatter died down, eyes turning to her, some curious, others skeptical. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice betraying an uncharacteristic tremor. She cleared her throat and steadied her gaze, determined to cut through the atmosphere thick with uncertainty. A part of her longed to retreat, to escape the weight of scrutiny and the fear of failure, but that part was smothered by the stronger urge to step up and own this moment. "I know we've had our differences in the past," she continued, channeling her mounting anxiety into a controlled passion. "But I believe we can find common ground. Today, I'm not here to impose ideas, but to foster an open dialogue. I've come to listen, to learn, and to share." The response was muted. Some heads nodded, while others wore expressions of doubt. A voice cut through the silence. "Who are you to tell us how to feel?" A woman stepped forward, her arms crossed defiantly. "You've only been here a short time." The words hit Sarah like a slap, a challenge. She could feel her heart pounding, the fear threatening to eclipse her resolve. "You're right," she replied, allowing her vulnerabilities to surface. "I may still be new here, but that's why I want to learn from you, because your experiences matter. I'm here to bridge gaps, not to create more." The reply hung in the air, a mixture of hope and despair. Responses flowed from the gathered crowd, weaving between stories of anger and betrayal that had simmered beneath the surface for far too long. Each person spoke with a rawness that resonated with Sarah, a shared pain that was achingly familiar. She felt their frustrations wash over her, pushing her deeper into the fray. As a man recounted a personal loss that had tied him to the community, Sarah felt a sudden surge of responsibility. This was not just about her. This was about unity, healing the rift, and building something authentic from those shared stories. Ideas sparked in her mind, prompting her to note down keywords: honesty, vulnerability, understanding. "Let's not focus on the past," she interjected at a lull, her voice finding clarity. "We can't change what's already happened, but we can choose to move forward together. Let's talk about what we need to change, how we can support each other." Just as she saw the glimmer of interest in their eyes, a shadow loomed. "You think just words will fix everything?" The voice was sharp, a man stepping forward from the back, his brow furrowed. "People are suffering, and you expect us to trust you with our stories?" The confrontation jolted her. His anger mirrored the fear she had tried to mask, yet she sensed something deeper beneath his hostility, an urgent plea for acknowledgement and action. "You're right," she said boldly, feeling the pulsating determination within her transform her anxiety into purpose. "Words are just the beginning. Action has to follow. Let's define what those actions look like together. What can we do today to make our community stronger?" The man's gaze met hers, a flicker of surprise crossing his features. As the crowd shifted from skepticism to cautious curiosity, she seized this opening. Here was a chance for real dialogue, an opportunity to give birth to a collective vision that went beyond just meeting norms or expectations. With her heart racing against the tide of skepticism, she felt the momentum beginning to shift. Inspired voices surged around her, hesitant yet emboldened by shared resolve. In that moment, Sarah recognized her own evolution. She was no longer an outsider driven by fear, but a capable advocate emboldened by a profound connection to those around her. Yet, as the discussion unfolded, a new fear crept in. What if they turned on each other? What if different factions within the group refused to compromise? What if her newfound strength hinged on a fragile balance? The intensity of the situation intensified, and Sarah could feel the stakes rising with every shared story that branched out into divergent opinions. The question loomed heavy in the air. Could she navigate this storm, or would her efforts culminate in chaos? As voices began to clash, she stood at the center of this brewing storm, a fragile bulwark against the forces threatening to tear them apart. Perhaps this wasn't just a personal test, but a crucible that would reveal her true strength. And then it struck her. The time had come to face not just the community's skepticism, but the very real possibility of her own disillusionment. Would she emerge victorious, or fall prey to the shadows lurking within this newfound challenge? With boldness flickering in her chest, she prepared to take the next step, for the truth behind her conviction awaited, lurking just out of reach. As the voices clashed and the energy within the group spiraled, Sarah instinctively took a step back, her heart pounding with uncertainty. The fiery exchange caused her to reflect on her own motivations. Why had she put herself in this position? Was she ready for the tumult she had invited? The stakes seemed insurmountable, and yet, deep within, a spark ignited. A determination to not only endure, but to dismantle the rising chaos through clarity and purpose. She felt a collective weight in the room, each shared story a thread weaving the fabric of the community they all belonged to. The fractures weren't just in ideology. They were woven into the tapestry of lives lived separate, yet painfully intertwined. Stepping forward once more, she steadied her breathing, grounding herself in the urgency of the moment. "I know it feels like trust is a long way off," she began, her voice firm yet empathetic. "But we must give it a chance to grow. We've all experienced pain, and that connects us more profoundly than our differences divide us." The faces around her remained tense, the skepticism still palpable. Yet she sensed a flicker of interest in their eyes, an acknowledgement that perhaps, just perhaps, there was a path to understanding, forged not in uniformity, but in the richness of diversity. Words continued to swirl, opinions clashing like thunder, but Sarah focused on the undercurrents, emotions simmering just beneath the surface. One young man stepped forward, cutting through the noise. "But how can we even start to trust someone who isn't from here?" There was bitterness in his voice, a challenge wrapped in a veil of hurt. This was her moment. Was she prepared to confront not just his question, but the larger issue of identity she felt was at play? "The fact that I'm from outside doesn't negate my commitment to understanding your struggles," she countered, the edge of conviction brightening her tone. "In fact, it grants me a unique perspective, a chance to learn and help navigate these waters." As the words spilled from her mouth, she felt the weight of vulnerability shifting. She wasn't merely presenting herself as an outsider, but as a bridge connecting various experiences. Drawing upon her own past struggles as a catalyst, she shared her journey, the choices she made that led her to this moment, this gathering. Each word was a piece of armor, vulnerability morphing into strength. The crowd listened intently, reflecting the duality of skepticism and curiosity in their stares. Some nodded thoughtfully, others still looked unconvinced. But a breakthrough was necessary, and she realized she needed to go further than mere words. "Let's explore our common ground," she suggested, her mind quickening with ideas. "Can we identify one issue that resonates with everyone here? Let's brainstorm actionable steps we can take today, together." The floodgates opened. Cautious at first, hesitant voices began to rise with suggestions, tangible ways to connect through local projects, community support systems, and shared resources. Sarah seized this momentum with fervor, jotting down ideas and thanking each person for contributing. Bit by bit, skepticism shifted into cautious respect. Yet her inner turmoil intensified. Self-doubt lingered like a shadow. Was she truly equipped to lead this process? Could her inexperience be a hindrance rather than a help? Every answer she sought seemed laced with more questions, a reminder of her fragile footing in this pivotal moment. As the discourse swirled around her, Sarah realized she stood at the precipice of both personal and communal growth. The combined voices offered a power she had not foreseen, an opportunity to become a conduit for resolution rather than a battleground for conflict. But just when it seemed like they were making progress, an uncomfortable tension arose. A deep-seated resentment against outsiders simmered within the crowd. The same scrutiny that Sarah had felt now shifted towards the man who had challenged her. The potential for escalation loomed large, dripping with the possibility of unraveling all they had worked toward thus far. "Who do you think you are?" another voice called out, this time directed at her ally. "You're not part of this discussion." As the tense exchanges threatened to unravel everything just when hope seemed to rise, Sarah felt panic clawing at her throat. The question echoed in her mind. Could she wield her growing strength against those who sought to push them apart, including her newfound comrades? Her heart raced in anticipation of the confrontation ahead. She had to act, to channel this chaos into constructive dialogue. The moment was ripe for revelation. How deep did her resilience run, and was she capable of leading them through the storm that threatened to tear them apart? Whatever happened next would define both her journey and theirs, but was she ready for the choices that lay ahead? The chaotic energy in the air crackled as Sarah realized the stakes. Taking a step forward, she interjected with a steady voice, "This is the moment where we must decide. Will we let our past experiences dictate our future, or can we forge a new way together?" The crowd fell silent, the tension palpable, their eyes fixed on her. For the first time she felt not like an outsider, but a pivotal player in this unfolding narrative. The collective rumble of doubt grew quieter, and beneath the surface tension lay the yearning for connection. She harbored a deep understanding of this, a longing she too had felt. "Let's address the fear," she continued, her tone ever more inviting. "Fear of the unknown, fear of outsiders, fear of change. But fear can also be the catalyst for growth, for better understanding." The words resonated, and for every nod she received, a spark ignited within her, a conviction that transformation was indeed possible. "Think about our shared experiences." Sarah held the gaze of the man who had challenged her. "Your concerns are valid. They echo the anxiety many feel when faced with change. Can we channel this fear? Can we turn it into action that builds trust rather than walls?" The atmosphere shifted. Small discussions reignited, and voices no longer clashed with hostility, but pondered upon her perspective. She had crossed a bridge, her confidence swelling with each moment of connection. "Let's visualize," she proposed. "Picture a community where our voices blend, where the value of diverse perspectives enriches our solutions. What if we take this as an opportunity not to fight against change, but to lead it?" A woman spoke up tentatively, expressing her own journey and how biases had shaped her perceptions. As she shared, others began to chime in, the seeds of dialogue taking root. "Every single one of us has stories that can foster empathy," Sarah emphasized. "Our stories can serve to bridge every divide." The conversation began to flow, transforming steel boundaries into silver linings. With every word, she could feel her body shedding the fears that had once clung like fog. Fear of inadequacy, fear of not belonging. The liberation felt phenomenal, exhilarating. She wasn't merely defending herself, she was claiming her rightful place as a leader, a facilitator for meaningful change. But as the discourse continued, she was reminded of the lingering skepticism that could still emerge. "Change does take time," she acknowledged, recognizing the need for patience. "What we need right now is a commitment to ongoing conversations, opportunities to air out any apprehensions." Eyes began to soften, acceptance curling at the edges of doubt, and Sarah's heart swelled with anticipation. The dialogue blossomed into brainstorming sessions, their ideas coalescing into strategies, mentorship initiatives, community service projects, spaces set aside for honest discussions. As she watched the transformation taking place before her, a familiar voice pierced through the crowd. "But what about you, Sarah? Are you committed to doing the work needed to make this community thrive?" She met the speaker's gaze head-on, the weight of accountability now resting on her shoulders. "Absolutely," Sarah declared, her voice unwavering. "I'm dedicated to working alongside each of you, not as an outsider, but as an ally. Let's set realistic steps together. The assurance echoed among the crowd. Support began to ripple outward as more residents expressed their dedication. Together, they were forging ahead, crafting a narrative laden with promise rather than fear. Hours passed, the nourished hope spilling into laughter and understanding. As the sun dipped on the horizon and shadows lengthened, a sense of camaraderie replaced the skepticism. They had initiated the foundational elements of community: understanding, empathy, and shared goals. Standing in the newfound solidarity, Sarah felt something shift within her. A profound transformation had happened. No longer just the chief of the FBI in the realm of justice, she was now a trailblazer in her community, fortified with recognition from others as a leader, driven by compassion and determination. With a smile, Sarah stepped back to take it all in. They were on the path to achieving something remarkable, a rare opportunity for genuine connection. The weight of past fears had been replaced with assurance and mutual respect. As the gathering dissipated slowly, a neighbor approached her directly. "Thank you, Sarah. This was the first step we needed." "No, thank you," she replied sincerely, feeling a warmth spreading through her chest. "The journey is just beginning, and together we'll ensure that this isn't just another moment. We're building something strong, something real." In that moment, surrounded by the glimmering potential embodied in her neighbors, she understood something essential. Transformation was indeed possible, and it began with acknowledging one's own vulnerabilities while forging connections through shared experiences. Sarah's journey had only just begun, but she felt the pulse of a new narrative beating vibrantly around her, a narrative where trust replaced fear, innovation replaced stagnation, and unity replaced division. As she walked home, the evening air filled with hope and possibility, Sarah smiled. The tumult of insecurities and obstacles she had faced had culminated in empowerment. Tomorrow would usher in new discussions, fresh ideas. She was prepared to tackle the next chapter. She had achieved not just her resolution, but a solid confidence in herself, ready to embrace the complexity of the challenges ahead. This was her growth, her story, and her destiny. Now more than ever, she understood the urgency to empower change. Join her on this ongoing journey of transformation. Don't miss out on future stories of resilience. Subscribe immediately to the channel so you never miss the next exclusive emotional narratives. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm and support this movement. Comment your reactions and theories on how Sarah's journey will develop next. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to be inspired by stories of individual achievement and community connections. It's time to uplift those around us.